So now we're going to start and get to the basics of bonds and debt. The first thing I want to make sure that we understand about bonds and debt, they're the same thing. When I say bonds, I mean debt and vice versa. When I was in the field before, when I was working back at MetLife, back in the Stone Age, back in the late 2000s, I would talk to my clients and talk to my prospects about stocks and bonds. And I would ask them what they think they are. I would ask them which they think is more complicated. I still talk to people about this. And there's this misconception out there that stocks are complicated, or at the very least, that they're more complicated than bonds. I mean, stocks go up and down. It's hard to really track what they're doing. I mean, it's so complicated. Bonds, you buy at 25, they mature at 50, or you buy at 50, they mature at 100 in like 15 years. You get them from the government. They're easy. Bonds are vastly more complicated than stock, both common stock and preferred stock. You're going to see that just this section, I believe, is as long, if not longer, than both sections on common stock and preferred stock. And there are like 5 sections that we talk about in different factors and different aspects of bonds. So make sure as you're studying, and it's likely that you will have questions and concerns and difficulties about bonds, make sure that you treat them with the respect they deserve. They are not as simple as a lot of people think. They are way more complicated than both common stock and preferred stock. But just like preferred stock, bonds are bought for income. Remember back to my example of looking for investors, I was offering you $80 a year, which is what the bond was, which is income. Instead of owning the company, instead of it being equity like the common and preferred stock that we just recently covered, you are a debtor of the company when you buy a bond. You are lending them money. When you're buying the bond, you are lending them money, and they are paying you interest on it. Bonds could be callable or convertible. We will be discussing them later. But bonds are purchased for current income. They are purchased for income. Remember, even more so than preferred stock. Preferred stock might have some equity participation. Little bit, make 10, 100 grand or something if common stock would be making hundreds of millions. Bonds have none of that. None of that equity. There is no direct equity in bonds or indirect equity. There's nothing. No growth in there. Now, as you have seen through the earlier slides, and as you will see through the later of this presentation and these classes, I try and use cartoons to keep it lively, to keep it entertaining, and I searched for cartoons on bonds. And I found a lot of what I was sort of expecting, but I did find one. It's sort of harder when you search for bond cartoons, or comics or jokes, what you might find. But I found this one and thought it was quite appropriate. Bond, James Bond, Opso, Wassa Opso. So has anyone watched this ever seen the movie Die Hard? Due to the data that I have on this from the students that I've seen and spoken to, there's probably a fair bit of chance that most people are shaking their head that they've seen it. It's a popular movie. A lot of people have seen it. If you're very young, you probably haven't. I feel old when I start talking about movies from like the 90s, and people are like, I haven't seen that. I'm like, I was too young. I'm like, oh God, I feel so old at that point. But anyway, in Die Hard, what were the villains after? Does anyone remember what they were after? Remember they were after something. You had Bruce Willis doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and I think it was Chris. Yeah, it was definitely Christmas. I'm forgetting which Die Hard here. There's so many of them at this point. But it was Christmas, and there was the trees and all that. But what were the villains after? They were after something called bearer bonds. Well, what are bearer bonds? These are bearer bonds. These are actually scenes from the movie and the bearer bonds from the prop show, the prop sale that was selling them afterwards. But the idea with bearer bonds, first of all, bearer bonds don't exist anymore. You may see them in the book. You may see them on the test where you need to understand basically just what they are. But the idea of bearer bonds, if I have $1 million of bearer bonds in my briefcase, and you want to stab me in the back to steal my briefcase of bonds, and you stab me in the back. Well, now you have $1 million of bearer bonds in your briefcase. If you remember the old adage about how possession is 9/10 of the law, that's not true in bearer bonds. In bearer bonds, possession is 10/10 of the law. If you possess the bearer bond, you own the bearer bond. If you stab me in the back to steal my bearer bonds, they're now your bearer bonds. Just like they were in Die Hard. One of the things people forget in movies is that sometimes they make things up. One of them they make up is how much money can fit in a briefcase. People think when they go, briefcase, $5-10 million in there. $1 million in $100 bills weighs 22 pounds. A little more than 22 pounds. $1 million in cash weighs 22 pounds. So when you see people sort of lifting over their bag, a backpack with $20 million in it, or a duffel bag with $20 million in it, no, there's not. Briefcase can hold a couple 100,000 maybe. A few 100,000, I don't know. Bearer bonds, though, this one right here says $100,000. This piece of paper right here is $100,000. How many of them do you think you can fit in a briefcase? I remember whenever I've read about bearer bonds, my thought was, were these created just so the criminals could run lots of money very quickly? These are some real bearer bonds. The idea with these is these were sold, and every 6 months someone would take one of these off, bring it to whoever the issuer is. You can see some of them have been removed, and they would be able to collect their interest. These little pieces of paper, if you think about them, sort of look like coupons, right? Like if you cut them out of a newspaper or something, or a magazine. That is why, with bonds, it is called coupon payments, or the coupon rate, or the coupon yield. Make sure you remember, if you think about these, if you bought this bond, this United States bearer bond over here, if you bought this one that says 75 cents here isn't going to change. No matter what happens to the market price, no matter what you might be able to buy and sell this for after it was issued, these payments are fixed. They never change. The coupon represents the payment. There are some needed definitions with bonds. The par value. We mentioned this with preferred stock. Mentioned it with common stock, how it doesn't ever matter with common stock. With bonds, it matters. With preferred stock, it matters. If you remember, preferred stock have a par value of $100, unless stated otherwise, and they're not with preferred stock. Bonds are $1,000 unless stated otherwise. They may state otherwise on these. Government bonds are known for being more than $1,000. If they're not $1,000, they will tell you that. If the question does not say that the par is other than $1,000, assume it is $1,000. 100 for preferred stock. We mentioned coupon on the previous slide. It is the stated interest rate. It is the nominal yield that is printed on the certificate. Interest is paid every 6 months, semi-annually. Take the annual income, divide it by 2, and that's paid every 6 months. Annual income is the coupon percentage times par, or the coupon times 1,000. Now, sort of using a trick of math, if you remember from preferred stock, you could take that percentage and just think of it as dollars with preferred stock. With bonds, you need to do one more thing. You need to multiply it by 10 first. So a 7% 7% bond pays 7 times 10, $70 a year. We're going to go through a couple more examples shortly. Maturity is something else that's all in bonds. If you recall from when I gave the example of the $1,000 investment, I said in 10, 20, 30 years, the bond's going to end. I'm going to give you back your money, and I'm going to stop paying you interest. That's maturity. That's the redemption. Maturity and redemption are the same thing for bonds. The date when interest payments stop. It is stated at the issue of the bond on the maturity date, the last interest payment and $1,000 is paid. That's the last semi-annual interest payment, and $1,000, the par, is paid back. So let's look at some coupon examples. If there was a coupon of 6%, just like when I gave the example of 7%, or if you remember back from my 8% bond that paid $80, think of the 6% as the number 6 and simply multiply it by 10. That's going to tell us that it pays $60 a year, or that's $30 every 6 months. Sometimes many times, sadly, they're not going to be nice and give you whole numbers. They're going to give you fractions. Don't be a hero. If you don't know fractions, if you don't like fractions, you have a calculator on the test. Pull it out. 1 divided by 4 equals 0.25. Add the 7. You're going to get the calculator is going to say 7.25 times 10. The calculator is going to tell you that that bond pays $72.50 per year. Divide by 2 will tell you that it pays $36.25 every 6 months. If you need to use the calculator, use the calculator. Now, one of the tricks you can actually use for the exam is the cheat sheet approach, or at least that's how some students look at it. Now, you can't actually bring a cheat sheet into the exam. You're not allowed to bring anything in. They're going to check your glasses and all that, for gosh sakes. But anyway, you can't bring a cheat sheet in, but you can memorize it. You could write out a cheat sheet, and then throw that away and write it again, and throw it away and write it out again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and eventually you memorize it. So the first thing you can do when you get into the exam is write out the cheat sheet. Now, most students who do that tell me that they don't actually ever look at that cheat sheet. And they sound sort of surprised. And I'm always like, okay, so let me make sure I got this right. You memorized this cheat sheet. You had everything memorized. You memorized all of this, and you wrote it out. And even though you memorized it, you're surprised that you remembered it and didn't need to look at the cheat sheet. Seems a little weird to me. I'm always surprised when students act surprised there. But that's the whole idea, is you're memorizing it. Write it out all the time. Write it out over and over and over and over again. The point of that story is that when students want to do that, or when we talk about sort of important visuals, I will always tell them that the one visual that they want to know, the most powerful, I believe, and most important visual for securities exams in general, not the SIE, not the Series 6 or 7, just across the board, all of them, is this one. This bond teeter-totter or seesaw, I believe, is the most important graphic that you can have. I have a detailed animation below that is going to show you more about this in this unit here. But for briefly, what this does is this shows you that it is a premium bond, a bond costing more than $1,000. This blue bar represents the yields. Nominal yield is higher than the current yield. Current yield is higher than the yield to maturity. Yield to maturity is lower. Current yield is lower than nominal here. This is in a premium bond. In a discount bond, one for less than $1,000, we know the nominal yield, or the coupon, is less than the current yield, which is less than the yield to maturity. Or the yield to maturity is greater than the current yield, is greater than the nominal yield on a discount bond. Again, I would definitely recommend watching the additional animation on this. Read the post on it if you still have questions. Something that is as powerful as I am claiming this to be isn't necessarily going to be easy to understand. Make sure you do spend the time on this and read and watch the additional information about it. Current yield is the annual income divided by the cost to purchase. Since the annual income never changes, it is the coupon times 1,000. The only part of that equation that changes is the cost to purchase. If a client wants to maximize their current yield or maximize their income, that means the exact same thing. If you're looking for a client, or a client's looking to maximize their current income, they're looking to find the highest current yield. Bond quotes. This is another area where bonds get a little bit confusing. People think that when they see a security priced at $102, that means it's $102. Not with bonds. I had a student a while ago call me and talk about a bond question where they were talking about how the bond cost $98, blah, 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 continuing. One of the things that you want to make sure in these questions is that you're reading the actual question, that you're not thinking things into them that aren't actually there. Because when I had the student ask me about the question that said $98 for the bond, I asked them, does it actually say dollars? Is there a dollar sign? Does it say dollars afterwards? And there was an awkward silence, an awkward quiet, and the student went, no. That's because bonds are given as a percentage of par. That 98 meant 98% of par. When we're dealing with normal $1,000 bonds, all the percentages dealing with them, if you want to convert them into dollars, like 98%, just multiply by 10. Same idea as with the coupon. 98 meant 98% of par. 98% of 1,000 is the same as 98 times 10, or $980. You want to be careful, though, with decimals or colons. If it says 08, 16, or 24, either decimal or a colon, that's in 30 seconds. Why 30 seconds? I don't know. I know that we've had as a species the concept of decimals for at least 20 or 30 years. I think we've had decimals a little longer than that, but at least 20 or 30 years. Why we're still using fractions for this, I don't know. But what I have discovered from FINRA over the years is that FINRA is mean. They're not cruel. Doing these types of questions is mean. But the fact when you're dealing with 8, 16, and 24 is the only ones they ever give. If these are in 30 seconds, 8 30 seconds, that's a quarter. 16 30 seconds, that's a half. 24 30 seconds, that's 3/4. So if you have the 08, you can think of that percentage, and I'm going to show you in the next slide some examples here, but you can think of that whole number, multiply it by 10 to give you the estimate, and then either add $2.50 if it's 08, $2.50, $5, or $7.50 if it's 24. The idea is that 1 point in a bond is $10. So any fraction, any of the thing after the whole numbers is simply talking about that last $10. So a quarter of $10 is $2.50. Half of $10 is $5. 3/4 of $10 is $7.50. So if we have a bond, an ABC bond, that's a 7% bond that's selling for $98. I already said that's 98% of par. I gave the example before. Well, that's $980. This 7% bond is selling for less than $1,000, but is paying $70 a year. It is vital to understand, when dealing with bonds, that coupon never changes. It represents the annual income, multiplied by 10. It never changes. I don't care what the price of the bond is. If we have BMK 6.5% for 101 1/4, well, either we know that 101 1/4 is 101.25, or we put into the calculator 1 divided by 4 is going to be 0.25. Add the 101, the whole number, that gets 101.25. So multiply by 10, we get $1,012.50. Your calculator is not going to have this last zero. Make sure you know you need to add that. They're not going to have an answer choice of 101.2.5. It's going to be $101.250. And it pays $65 a year. 6.5% times 10, you just move the decimal over, is $65. Even though it cost more than it initially did. When the bond first sold, it was $1,000. After that, price goes up and down. But the coupon never changes. This last one's the tricky one. The 8% bond for 99:24. Well, that 8% means it is paying $8. Sorry, $80. 8 times 10, $80. This 24, though, you got to remember, is out of 30 seconds. 24 30 seconds is the same as 3/4, or 0.75. Add the 99, that's 99.75. Multiply by 10, $997.50, and it pays $80 a year. I don't care what the price is, it is always going to pay the same amount. Zero coupon bonds. These are a different type of bond. We've talked about how bonds pay every 6 months. Zeros don't. Zero coupon. There's two ways of thinking about that. One is it has no coupons. Zero coupons. Or, if you prefer, that it's a 0% coupon. Either way, if a bond has zero coupons, no semi-annual payments, or it's paying semi-annually every 6 months of 0% of par, I'm hoping we don't need a calculator to figure out what 0% of par is. It's zero. They don't have anything. They don't pay interest. There's zero coupons. They don't pay interest. What they do, though, is they are bought at a discount. All bonds mature at par. This bond, if it's $1,000 par, is going to mature $1,000. In 10 years, if you own this, you're going to get $1,000. It's worth something today, but less than $1,000. Hence, it's always bought at a discount. Less than $1,000, less than par. They mature at par. That difference between what I paid, what I bought it for, and what it matures at is effectively the interest, is the income. Now, that income is technically taxable each year. It's called phantom income, or when you get more technical, accrual of income. The idea is this 10-year bond is going to mature at $1,000, and I purchased it for $500. So in 10 years, I'm going to make $500. That means in 10 years, making $500, I'm basically making $50 a year. That is what's taxable each year. Each of those years, I actually have to pay on $50 worth of income that I haven't gotten yet. Why? I don't know that either. To me, it always makes sense. Why don't you tax it when it matures or when they sell it and actually have the money, instead of taxing it when they actually haven't made any money? I don't know. I don't make the laws. I just teach them. The duration equals the maturity with a zero coupon bond. This is going to come back more later in the chapter and section in that chapter on risks, when we talk about interest rate risks. But basically, duration is how long the bond is going to take to pay for itself. Since zero coupons have no payments before maturity, duration equals maturity. All other bonds, all coupon bonds, have a duration less than maturity. The longer the duration, the more that bond is going to be susceptible to changes in interest rate. What this basically means is that zero coupon bonds are especially susceptible, especially at risk, should interest rates change negatively. Examples include traditional U.S. government EE savings bonds that we're going to talk about. Those are the ones that you buy at 25 and sell at 50, or buy at 50 and sell at 100. Those are given out at like births or confirmations, baptisms, bar and bat mitzvahs, all kinds of namings, things like that, where you buy them for 25, which are 50, as I said, or strips, which we will be talking about shortly. That's the separately trading of registered interest and principles of securities. We need to know that those are zeros, and as I said, we will be discussing them in a later section. But that brings us to the end about the basics of bonds. Up next is going to be additional facts about bonds. Again, remember, bonds are complicated, they are tricky. Make sure that you do spend the time necessary for them. They are tested. Make sure you are ready. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again shortly.